I'll say this. We are down, but we are not out. Of course, I'm referring to the Detroit Tigers there, as we will discuss in this episode. Welcome into I'll Say This. We have a jam-packed episode for you today. Much to discuss. You know, it really is a sign of the times when we can be this deep into fall and have so many different sports to talk about. It's not just college football. It's not just the NFL. We got playoff baseball that we're going to discuss, and we will start off with that. First off, just a little programming note. No, there was no show last week. Austin and I were in Detroit doing some content as the Tigers were making their push through the American League wildcard round. And if you want to see that, Austin, I'm sure, can link to this video. Really good video that we did, about 15 minutes long, chronicling our 2+ days at Comerica Park for the watch parties as the Tigers pulled off their pretty amazing upset for their first playoff series win in 11 years. Really felt good. You know, one of the best and sometimes worst parts of what I have the privilege of doing with content creation is the fact that so many moments are documented. And we've talked about it a million times, but we've waited so long to see the Tigers get to this point again. And the fact that, you know, this is something that I could go back and watch whenever I want. I don't know. It's meaningful to me. And I really hope to the viewers and listeners of my content that it's meaningful to you guys as well, that you can experience this with me. You know, this has been so much fun to watch the fans' jubilation as the Tigers have made this a run, but they find themselves at something of a crossroads here as of the time we're recording this podcast. First, I do want to talk about the series against Houston. You know, it was bizarre because in a lot of years when you enter the postseason, you know, you enter it with there's a nervousness because it's, hey, I want to go out. I want to win the World Series. I want to win the pennant. I want to make a deep run. I've said for a while that this team is playing with house money. I think many people agree. But at the same time, while this season, regardless of what would have happened in October, is still an overwhelming success relative to expectations, I think that we all were interested to see how this young team that had played so well, I mean, historically well, over the last month and a half of the season would respond in October. I made a video about it. Look, man, October is like the Tri-Wizard tournament, okay? It changes you. I've seen mediocre players become legacy guys, right? You know, I mean, David Freese had an all right career, but when you think of David Freese, you think of arguably the greatest offensive postseason ever that he had in 2011, right? The guy's gonna get a standing ovation and probably never have to buy another meal in St. Louis ever again for that run. And I've seen great players, whether it's pitchers or hitters, struggle mightily when you get to October. I'm all about data and I'm all about analytics and playing the matchups, but this game is played by humans and humans respond in weird ways to the pressures of October. So I had no idea how this team, whose oldest player right now is Matt Vierling, would respond to the challenge. And to say that it was an overwhelming success in round one was an understatement. I would argue the first few innings of game one against Houston. First off, you wanted to see Skubal get off to a good start, and he didn't just get off to a good start, but he finished strong. 6 scoreless. We'll talk about him in a second, but Framber Valdez is a pitcher who, in the second half of the season, outside of Skubal, had arguably been the best pitcher in the American League. Guy's a ground ball machine. He's pitched deep into games, and you had the bottom of the Tigers order with Jake Rogers and Trey Sweeney, guys coming through with big hits. You had Parker beating out a double play. Vierling got a big Vierling got a single. Wenzel got a big hit as well. I mean, they just kept the line moving against a really, really good pitcher. You go ahead 3-0, and at that point, you were feeling pretty good. Now, when they had runners on second and third with one out in the ninth, and Brisky came in to try to close it down, I wasn't feeling as good. But to this team's credit, man, in that first round against Houston, they didn't blink one time. They were totally up to the challenge in an environment that has seen a whole lot of success over the last 7-8 years. I mean, this was a team that, until this week, had made it to 7 straight American League Championship Series. They'd won 4 pennants. They'd won 2 World Series. And much of that core still remained. And the Tigers just took it to them. I felt pretty good about the series coming in. You know, when it comes to my teams, I don't like making predictions just because I'm such a nervous Nelly. Like, I just want to see success. I just want to see them win. But, you know, I felt like if they won game 1, they would probably win game 2 and win the series. And that's exactly what happened. Tarek Skubal, who is going to be pitching on Monday in game 2 against the Guardians. And we are going to talk about that series, obviously. The performance against Houston for his first postseason outing, just marvelous. And now that he's building upon his legacy, this has really become one of the great seasons by a Tiger ever. I mean, it already was Triple Crown winner, future Cy Young winner, nothing left to prove. But for him to, in his first postseason outing, go out there at Minute Maid Park and shove 6 scoreless against a team that has perennial all-stars and MVP caliber players in that lineup, that was something to behold. And obviously he's got an even bigger start coming up that we will discuss. But man, this is this year, while the latter half has been amazing and they've won so many close games, I've said from the beginning, the 2024 Detroit Tigers to me started and ended with the transcendent season that they've gotten from Tarek Skubal. It was really remarkable. Now, you get to game 2, everything was going according to plan. You had a 1-0 lead. Hunter Brown was fantastic for Houston. And this is, we're at that point in the season when you get to October where, you guys have seen me rip my hair out and rant about Tigers teams that fail to score a lot of runs. But at this point in the year, every pitcher you're facing is a good pitcher. You're not seeing Kenta Maeda. You're going to be seeing guys who know how to spin the ball, who've got firm fastballs, who can strike guys out. So Hunter Brown was fantastic. The fact that they got 1 run against him in an outing where I think he went 5 2/3. I mean, he was really, really good. And he was just blowing that fastball by guys and they couldn't catch up to it. It was Parker who turned on a breaking ball that put the Tigers in front. And then AJ made the decision to go to Jackson Jobe in the 7th inning of a 1-run game. Of course, hindsight's 2020. It's such a tough position. I get it. Look, he comes in there, goes 1, 2, 3. We're not even talking about it, but he hits the first guy. I guess I don't want to be such a pessimist and say I never liked the decision because, nobody likes the decision after it doesn't work, but I felt like they did stick with him a little bit too long. At the same time, he didn't give up much hard contact at all. And Jake Rogers had a play that he should have made at home. Vierling had a fly ball where he double clutched and Pena ended up tagging up from third. It seemed like a disaster. And then you get to the 8th inning against 2 pitchers that you rarely want to face, right? Ryan Presley and Josh Hader, especially in October. I mean, Ryan Presley in October has been historically good for Houston in the past. He comes in, gives up 2 hits, throws a wild pitch, and then they load the bases with Josh Hader in the game. They put in Andy Ibanez to pinch hit. Andy Ibanez all year and really last year as well, known for one thing. He hits left-handed pitching. In the at-bat of his career, he hits a bases-clearing RBI double to put the Tigers in front for good. And this is what I love about October baseball because Andy Ibanez, when it's all said and done, and he's been in the league for a minute now, is going to be remembered as a completely forgettable player for the most part. He was a guy that, if you look at the splits, okay, he hit lefties, is a little bit versatile defensively, but if you were to ask somebody to name 500 Major League Baseball players, they would probably name 600 before they got to Andy Ibanez. And yet, when that guy does inevitably leave Detroit and returns to Comerica as a member of an opposing team, he's going to get a standing ovation off the backs of 1 hit, and I love that. I love that about postseason baseball. I love that you can take what is the largest sample size in sports, that 162-game schedule, and condense it down into these tiny little moments. I was very happy for Ibanez. I mean, you work your entire life for a moment like that. That is one of the clutchest hits in the history of the Detroit Tigers. And of course, you had the bullpen closing it down. And it was incredible. Just before we get to the Cleveland series, it felt so good to see this. And, you didn't know how they would respond. And it was great to see that they were ready and they were good to go and they pitched fantastic. But being down there in Detroit and just seeing the outpouring of love and happiness on social media, I mean, this has been such a long time coming for this fan base. And teams go through droughts and teams go through down periods, but the Tigers' bottom of the barrel was below the bottom of most teams' barrels. Like, if that makes any sense at all. I think back to 2019 when even guys who we thought could be good turned out to be bad, right? And you were throwing out lineups with Travis DeMeritt and Jordy Mercer and Kristen Stewart and Dowell Lugo, and to 4 or 5 years later have a team that's knocking off what had been the American League Goliath. I mean, let's be real. For the last 7 years, even if they didn't win the pennant, the American League kind of went through Houston. You knew that if you had to win the pennant, you had to knock off Houston at some point, and the Tigers were able to do that in the first round. And it just felt great because you saw so many people are rooting for this team. I mean, even my former boss, Dave Portnoy, gave me and Austin a shout out for our reaction to the video that we did at Comerica. It meant a lot. But job's not finished. And the Tigers had another series that they've started on Saturday against the Cleveland Guardians, and they got pummeled. Do I think it was one of those Tigers became aware of the moment situations? I don't. I think it was more so they didn't execute. The Tigers lost that game in the way that they lose most of the games that they lose. They didn't pitch well. They fell behind early. This is not an offense that's built to come back from big deficits. Yes, I know they have had some late comeback victories, a lot of late inning comeback victories, but for the most part, not 7-0, not 5-0, right? The fact is this set up for AJ to do his thing and play the matchups. And AJ's done that marvelously over the last month and a half, really the entire second half of the season. But even more so, these pitchers have executed. Tyler Holton had been the best reliever in the world for about 3 or 4 months, right? He comes in and you knew when Quan ripped that double off the right field wall, that something was up, and they just couldn't get out of their way in the first inning. Now, I thought Reese Olson came in, and what could end up being an overlooked moment in this series. Reese Olson came in and I thought pitched very well. That was essentially a start for him, right? 5 innings, 1 earned run. May have earned himself a start at some point in this series. And while he's still kind of coming back from that shoulder injury, and he did miss a lot of time, I brought it up in my post-game video that people forget for several months there, Reese Olson was one of the best pitchers in the American League. In fact, relatively deep into the season, his ERA, I think, was lower than Tarek Skubal. Now, they didn't give him any run support, and we were pulling our hair out because of it, but he could very much be an X factor in this series. The Tigers weren't going to sweep their way through the American League playoffs. They were going to lose at some point. Things were going to go sideways at some point, and now you have the defining moment of this team, the defining moment of this season, which is the game they're going to play today in Cleveland. Tarek Skubal on the mound in game 2. I mean, it's goes without saying, but it's a must win. We're in the postseason, so I'm not going to count any team out until it's mathematically impossible. But you go down 2-0, having lost a Skubal start, the possibility of you winning this series or even pushing it to 5 games greatly decreases. It is a ton of pressure to put on a guy who has answered the call for you all season long. When they have needed Tarek Skubal, you look at the last several starts of Tarek Skubal, they had to start on the road to complete the sweep against Kansas City, got it done. He had the start at home to kick off the final homestand against Tampa Bay, through 7 scoreless, maybe the best outing of the regular season and the final outing of the regular season for him. And then you have game 1 of a playoff series against Frommer, and he goes 6 scoreless. You know, even the best pitchers crack at some point. And I trust Tarek Skubal with my life at this point, but it is the disadvantage of only having one legitimate starter. Now, it helps that starter is the best starting pitcher in the world, which he has been all season. But look, they're going to need him to deliver. It's only fitting that they go up against Matt Boyd in game 2. Like, why wouldn't they? Matthew Boyd kind of pitched some good baseball for Cleveland, and that scares me. But what scares me more is they showed a statistic that blew my mind. And I've talked about how good Cleveland's bullpen has been all year, but the Cleveland Guardians are 71-2 when leading after 6 innings this season. 71-2. That means a third of the game is just cut off if you are losing to Cleveland after 6 frames. And while Boyd has pitched some good baseball and Bybee pitched some really good baseball in game 1, the way that the Tigers will win these games is not by getting to Cleveland's bullpen. If they do, hey, stroke of luck, more power to you, because you've done something no other team has been able to do pretty much all season. But the back end of that pen is nails. It really is strange how much postseason baseball and the strategy of postseason baseball has changed, because I still do believe the greatest neutralizer for any baseball team in October is having a starting pitcher that can shut down a lineup through 6, 7 or more innings. I do believe that. But Cleveland is a team where their aces pitch 1 inning at a time. It is Cade Smith and Heron and Emmanuel Clase who are able to come in, pump triple digits and strike out, 8 of the 12 batters that they're going to face over a 4-inning stretch. I mean, these guys are incredible. You got to get to them early, put some runs on the board. I would like to see what Skubal's numbers are this year after the Tigers spot him an early lead, because I feel like he does a really good job of getting shutdown innings and settling in. Hopefully he'll be able to do that. This team has, I'm not going to say playing on borrowed time, because they've earned this moment. They've earned this moment and this position to be in, but I just don't want this to end, man. I know we're going to have home playoff baseball here in a few days. I'm going to be going with Austin, but man, I want to see home playoff baseball when it's 1-1 as opposed to 2-0. That would be a heck of a lot of fun. So at this point, look, maybe this is 06 all over again, where they get popped in that first game against the team that a team that won their division, and people are saying you're already out of it. Then you bounce back in game 2 and you end up sweeping your way through the rest of the series. This thing is far, far, far from over. Of course, you would have liked to have stolen game 1, but is there anybody who wouldn't have? Is there any fan of any team that says, no, I'm glad we lost game 1? It was actually for the better. No, of course not. This is the postseason. You want to win every game. And with the pitching staff being what it's been up to this point in the second half of the season, you have relative confidence that they can pitch well. For the first time in I don't know how long, the pitching staff fell apart in a meaningful game. That was going to happen at some point. You just got to pray to God that it doesn't happen again, or else, this run might be over shortly. But I still have faith. I still have belief in my Tigers, and I'm still only sleeping several hours because we're playing October baseball, and that freaks me out. But incredibly proud of the boys. I just don't want this run to end, because I can't even – I saw a team win a national championship last year, and I can't tell you how much fun this is. This is the most fun I've had watching sports maybe ever. I just love this team, and I've loved interacting and seeing the fans' reaction. It's been incredibly humbling and incredibly fun. And if you want a taste of that, check out the video that Austin and I did. We're going to transition now to the college football in this state. And this is going to be much snarkier than the somewhat hopeful, somewhat optimistic take that I've had about the Detroit Tigers. I want to start off by talking about the Michigan Wolverines, who lost their game on Saturday in Washington against the Huskies 27-17. This was a huge game for Michigan. And it wasn't a huge game in the sense where if they had won, I would have felt like the possibility of the college football playoff or beating Ohio State was somehow on the table. I mean, I've come to terms with that. This team is remarkably flawed. But for a brief second in the first half into the third quarter of the Washington game, it felt like Michigan had finally gotten the spark that they were looking for. I had heard through the grapevine, through my very reliable sources, that there was a possibility that Jack Tuttle, a seventh-year grad transfer quarterback, was going to be seeing some playing time against Washington. Now, before I go any further, if you are that unconfident with Alex Orji, if you don't believe in Alex Orji and you have a fear that this team's going to fall behind early in a game, why start him? First of all, that's not fair to Orji because you got him on such a short leash. I've never liked that with two quarterback systems because you always feel like you have somebody breathing down your neck. And it's not fair to Jack Tuttle. Jack Tuttle had his moments on Saturday, and we are going to discuss that. But you spotted the guy a 14-0 deficit. They had to almost play perfect just to come back and take the lead in that game, which they did at one point. But for a brief second, despite all the flaws and frustrations that I have with this team, and they are aplenty, it seemed as though for a brief second, Michigan had found a spark at quarterback. I accepted on January of this year after Michigan beat Washington in the national championship, which feels like forever ago. I had accepted that there is not a playmaking quarterback on this roster. Michigan made a mistake not poaching the portal. If you want to blame the coaching search or, Harbaugh keeping the program in limbo, whatever. It doesn't matter. The fact is they didn't have a quarterback after JJ left, and they don't have one now. There's not a playmaker here. The best that we could have hoped for coming into the season was a Cade McNamara type. Run the offense. Don't turn the ball over. And you know what? Every so often, you're going to make a big-time throw downfield. I think, and this is where I will defend Sharon Moore to a certain extent, I think they believed they had that with Davis Warren. And there were glimpses. Now, they were very small glimpses, but there were glimpses into that over the first 2+ games. You would see him make a solid throw downfield to Colston Loveland. And you think, okay, maybe there is something here. The problem is the guy was a turnover machine. And this is not the kind of offense. This isn't some air raid attack. This is not an offense that's going to survive consistently turning the ball over. Last season, one of the many reasons why they were so successful, they didn't fumble ever. And JJ threw 4 interceptions all year, and 3 of them were in one game against Bowling Green. And if you're going to throw picks, that's the game to throw them in. Not the Rose Bowl, not Ohio State. You throw them in a not-so-meaningful game against a vastly inferior opponent. I mean, I would kill for that sort of stability this season. But Warren committed too many turnovers. You go to Alex Orji. Alex Orji, and you know what? I've been pretty harsh on the guy, and so I want to back off a little bit. I'll just say, the coaching staff hasn't put him in position to succeed, and he's not a Big Ten quarterback. I mean, I don't even know if he's a MAC quarterback, quite frankly. Let me correct that. I don't know if he's a quarterback. I see zero confidence or ability in this guy to be able to throw the football downfield. So I'll lay off him for now because I know I've hammered him, and I was very angry after the game just because I think that was a horrific move by the coaching staff, even starting him, knowing full well the second things went sideways, you were going to go to another quarterback. And when they did, things started looking up. Tuttle made some plays. He didn't do anything that wowed you. JJ would do stuff that wowed you, but he was going through his progressions. He wasn't turning the ball over. He was relatively mobile in the pocket. Michigan started running the ball effectively. You got a long touchdown run from Donovan Edwards. He was hitting some guys. He hit Walker on a third down pass in the third quarter. It seemed like things were starting to roll. And then this remarkably undisciplined team continued to do what they've done all season, which is that they could not get out of their own way. Look, I've been watching Michigan football for over 20 years now. Okay? I've seen Michigan teams that were incredibly successful. I've seen a national championship, and I've seen teams that crumbled. Every single one of them had one thing in common. They all had talent. Even some of those Rich Rod teams where he was just recruiting fast 3-star guys. Round peg in a square hole in regards to philosophy. The 3-3-5 wasn't going to work at Michigan, but they had talent. Okay, I mean, Brady Hoke, who was kind of a hack, inherited a lot of that talent and went 11-1 in the first, or 11-2 in his first campaign. Right? There's always talent at Michigan. There's always 4-star guys around here. Where the difference comes in is that over the last several years, you had smart players, you had a remarkably fundamental coaching staff, and an extremely disciplined group of guys. They didn't miss tackles. They turned the ball over, or they forced turnovers. I'm sorry, defensively. They didn't miss assignments, and they didn't beat themselves. There is a lot of talent here, and you can't convince me otherwise. The Michigan could lose every game the rest of the season, and Kenneth Grant, Josiah Stewart, Will Johnson, and Mason Graham are still going to make a lot of money in the NFL going forward. Those are four guys that should give you an elite defense. And the fact is, to me, that's kind of where this starts, because we knew the quarterback play wasn't going to be spectacular. We knew that there was going to be regression offensively, that the offensive line wasn't going to be the same. In fact, outside of Colson Loveland and Khalil Mullings, I feel like the entire offense has just been stagnant water. I mean, who are these receivers? Your current leading receiver outside of Colson Loveland is Samaj. He's got like 63 yards in the season, and that's not an exaggeration. Like, this is Brian Ferentz offense levels of ineptitude in your passing game. But coming into the year, we knew those problems existed. From day one, I talked about the quarterback being an issue. What I did not expect to be an issue was the fact that this defense is way too passive. They're undisciplined. They miss tackles. They give up long pass plays early in games. They commit penalties. That is the shocking part, because I at least expected, even if Wink Martindale didn't know what he was doing, that there were enough guys returning for the core to still be solid, for a lot of the culture from the Harbaugh era to still carry over. And not only is the defense as a whole disappointing, but I don't even think the stars look like stars. I mean, Will Johnson committed an incredibly stupid penalty at the end of the Washington game. That was preventable. You know, you'll go long periods of time without hearing certain guys' names. And I acknowledge these guys are remarkable talents. Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham. I mean, these guys, in a lot of ways, have nothing left to prove. They're going to make their money in the NFL. But this defense should be significantly better. Now, with that said, even if this defense was elite, it is hard to overcome the dumb penalties and the dumb mistakes and silly turnovers that this offense has committed. Tuttle came into the game and started running the offense, and you got excited. What ended up happening was a combination of Kirk Campbell's mind-numbingly stupid play calling and poor execution. They turned the ball over twice. Your quarterback turned the ball over twice in the fourth quarter. Even if the defense would have held strong, you're giving the other team a very, very short field. That's tough to stop. And Michigan ultimately falls apart, and they end up losing 27 to 17. Sorry, my apologies. This team has me stumbling over my words. I said in my post-game video something that I'll stand by, which is the only good that comes out of this is that we can cut the charade. Michigan was ranked 10th in the country coming into the game against Washington. And even if they would have won that game on Saturday, if there were only 9 teams in college football that were better than Michigan, then we need to do something about the entire college football system, quite frankly. I believe, as of the time of this recording, at least in one of the polls, Michigan has dropped to 24th. I would argue that's generous. I don't think that this is a top 25 team. And it's tough because you're coming off of the greatest stretch of Michigan football ever. And I've mentioned before, there is kind of nowhere to go but down. But even by the standards of just, hey, let's see where this goes. Let's hope that this team can see improvement throughout the season. If you just remove everything you've seen over the last 3 years, you'd still be disappointed by this product. That you can just tell that something is off right away. And I think it starts with the coaching staff. And I can't believe I'm saying this, because it sounds like such a what have you done for me lately rant. But the thing is, what I don't like in all forms of sports is when you know, whether it's a player or a coach, you know someone's a hack and you know that there are issues, but you allow those issues to persist because, hey, you got to give it more time. I'm not a believer in that. You know, we've seen so many guys who have slipped through the cracks where we said, be patient, be patient, be patient. Eventually, you do have to deliver. And right now, these problems are legitimate. This coaching staff is not what it was over the last several seasons. Sharon Moore, if you don't want to blame him, you at least have to blame him for the staff that he put together just not being up to par. Wink Martindale's been a mess. Kirk Campbell's been a nothing. And offensively, you don't have many playmakers. You know, I know a lot of people are criticizing this receiving core, but I don't know about this receiving core. They don't have anybody who can give them the ball. So this is a mess. And this is a team that's going to get punched in the mouth a lot more. The only game that I feel confident they win for the remainder of the season is Northwestern. Besides that, we're talking about a 7-5, 6-6 football team. They'll probably find a way to squeak out one other one. I don't know what it'll be. But any delusions that this team had, even several weeks ago after the USC game, of maybe being a team that could win ugly and scratch and claw their way to the college football playoff, that's all out the window, baby. This team does not have it. And there are serious problems that they're just extremely noticeable at this point. And it's incredibly disappointing coming off the heels of such an amazing run. But man, yeah, it's rough. It's rough. All right. I want to move on. I want to talk about the Lions a little bit. They are in a bye week, but I just wanted to bring up what was a very fun Monday night game that they played last week against Seattle. It was very similar to the games that they've played against the Seahawks before. Turned into kind of a track meet. Very, very entertaining game. I don't know why the NFL keeps doing 2 Monday night games. I guess it's so that one can suck and one can be great, because this one was a lot of fun. I just want to throw it out there. I have been watching football, like I said, for over 20 years, and not just NFL football. I've been watching football, starting from watching guys in my class when they were playing 4th grade Pee Wee football. I never played. I'm not an athlete, but I watched. I have never seen a football game in which a team went an entire game without throwing an incomplete pass. That was really incredible. And it speaks to the confidence I have in this regime versus the lack of confidence that I've had in literally every other regime that has existed in Detroit Lions history, at least in my lifetime. Because in the first 3 weeks of the season, while this team was 2-1 and they had their moments and it seemed like JMO was emerging, something about the offense hadn't completely clicked. You played a really good first half against Arizona, then kind of fell apart. You had big plays against Los Angeles, and you had the final drive in overtime, but there was a lot in between that was kind of inconsistent. You had red zone opportunities that you missed against Tampa Bay. In other regimes, I would be freaking out saying this doesn't get fixed. They're about to turn a molehill into a mountain, and this is going to be an issue that persists for the remainder of the season. But this is a coaching staff that I have so much faith in, and what you saw was an offense that went out there after 3, by their standards, so weeks, and performed masterfully. To call it a perfect game is like, it's actually true in this particular instance. I mean, your quarterback's perfect. You have a wide receiver who throws a touchdown pass. You ran the ball effectively. Defensively, it was more in line with the kind of defense we saw last year, which was getting gashed pretty consistently. The other team's best wide receivers beating you. I mean, this secondary, Terrion Arnold, God bless him. I know he's only a rookie, but he is getting picked on bad. And the penalties are really starting to add up. If you want to say that the refs had something to do with it or there were some questionable calls, fine. But they're getting called for 5 or 6 defensive secondary penalties a game. There's some of this shit that you just got to clean up. But they did force a turnover. Actually, 2 turnovers, including a late one by Kirby Joseph, who's had a solid start to the season. And now you move forward. Look, they're in totally adequate position right now. They are where they need to be. Let one slip away against Tampa Bay in the second game of the season. But this has been a tough schedule, and more so than a tough schedule, this is going to be a tougher division than I think a lot of us, maybe not a lot of us expected, but definitely more tough than it was a year ago. Because last year, Green Bay emerged in the second half. But when Cousins was injured, you knew that the Vikings were out of it and the Bears were never really in it. Like I said, Green Bay emerged in the latter part of the season, kind of right before Detroit was about to clinch. In this particular instance, look, you got a Vikings team that's 5-0. And the Packers, while they've had their setbacks and the Jordan Love injury, I think that ultimately they're going to be fine. And I don't think the Bears are any pushover either, except on the offensive line, because they don't have one. But the fact that the Bears are the worst team in that division, says a lot, because they're not that bad. They're not a 4-13, worst team in the division kind of bad. So this is going to be, it's going to be a bumpy road, but I have faith in this regime. I have faith in this staff. It's just the ceiling for this football team for the remainder of the season will be determined by 2 things. Number 1, can you find somebody other than Aiden Hutchinson who can consistently rush the quarterback? And 2, can your secondary figure things out? And now they forced a few turnovers. Thank you very much, Kirby Joseph. But Carlton Davis and Terrion Arnold have had rough starts to their campaigns in 2023. Terrion Arnold isn't shocking with him being a rookie, but Carlton Davis, that seemed like kind of a sure thing, and I'm surprised at the struggles. Maybe I'll have to check PFF. Maybe he hasn't been as bad as the eye test would show, but it's Aaron Glenn's defenses, dude, where you'll get annoyed by him, you think they stink, and then they'll make a play. And that's kind of what they've been. That's definitely what they were against Seattle, and that's what they've been at points during his entire regime. But up to this point, it's kind of worked. All right. Anything else? I could talk about Michigan State. That Oregon game they played was incredibly boring. Michigan State seemed completely overmatched. And I'm not surprised they lost, and I'm not surprised they lost by a lot. I guess I did expect, with Michigan State looking the way that they did in the first few weeks of the season, that they would at least be a little bit more competent offensively against some of these teams. And Oregon's really good. Oregon's arguably, them or Ohio State, the best team that Michigan State is going to play this season. So I don't want to rip them too much, but both Michigan and Michigan State, that game on October 26th is going to be one of the ugliest fucking football games, because it will be completely decided by who turns the ball over the least. I think I tweeted out yesterday, I'll put the over-under for overall turnovers in that game at about 5.5. because Aiden Childs, as high as the ceiling is, and I do think he'll be very good, has been a turnover machine, and Michigan can't get out of their own way. That's going to be a sloppy football game when these two teams play on October 26th. Am I looking forward to it? No, I never look forward to that game. It stresses me out every year. But I think, in a bizarre way, they're as evenly matched as they've been in quite a while, because I think both these teams are mid as fuck. I think Michigan State has an excuse to be mid. They have a first-year coach coming off of a kind of disastrous end to the previous regime. Michigan, not so much, but whatever. That will do it for today's show. You can follow me on Twitter at Castellani2014. We'll be back with an episode of Chris and Company this week. Tony Garcia of the Detroit Free Press will join us. Looking forward to having him on the show. Known him for a long time. He's a huge Tiger fan. We are going to talk Tigers, but obviously with Michigan in their bye week, we are going to talk about Michigan football, kind of what's gone right, what's gone wrong, and actually ask him a little bit about Dusty May and Michigan hoops, what they have in store for this upcoming season, because we are getting closer to a new era of Michigan basketball, which I probably haven't talked about a whole lot on this show, but is something that I'm pretty excited about. So hopefully I didn't leave anything out. Thank you guys very much for continuing to support the program. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, subscribe on Spotify, subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Let's get those watch hours up. Rate us, support us, spread the word. We're trying to get the numbers up, and we're working hard to do so. Once again, as always, shout out Austin, not just for the production on this podcast, but for the production on everything that I do, making my life a lot easier and making me look about as good as I could possibly look, which I know is a very difficult thing to do. So thank you guys so much. We'll be back later this week with a Chris and Company, and then we will be back next week, hopefully still talking about a Tigers team that is still kicking. So prayer circle. Let's hope Tarek Skubal shoves. See you guys next week. Have a good one. Peace and happiness.